It's a long meeting today, but we have a tremendous amount of work. I have been humbled by the work that has been done to date to explain all that has gone on with the merit review process. It is reflecting the elegance of more than 26 years of thought with regard to how we allocate the important resources that the National Science Foundation has. I'm, as I say, humbled by the intellectual firepower that has been brought to bear and hope that we can make our own contribution to this process as part of the Merit Review Commission. Welcome everyone to today's open meeting of the NSB-NSF Commission on Merit Review. My name is Stephen Willard, Chair of the Commission, and I'm accompanied by the Commission's Vice Chair, Wanda Ward. The Commission on Merit Review is comprised of members of the National Science Board and National Science Foundation. Let's start by taking the roll. Roger Beachy. Alicia Neal. Here. Steve Leith. Candace Major.
Here.
Matt Malkin.
Here.
Sarah K. McDonald.
Here.
Julia Phillips.
Here.
Scott Stanley.
Here.
Kayvon Stassen.
Here.
And Wanda Ward.
Here.
Our NSBO liaisons are Portia Flowers, Ann Bushmiller, and Alexandra Serchel. And we are also joined by Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellows Danielle Taylor and Vida Trevino. This happens to be Teacher Appreciation Week, so we're especially grateful to have you all join us here today. Thank you, Danielle and Vida, for all you do and all you have contributed to the board office. This is an open session, live streamed via the board's YouTube channel, as well as a hybrid meeting. Some meetings are attended in person and some via Zoom. For those members here in person, please be sure you're logged into the Zoom for this meeting. You will need to keep your laptop speakers, Zoom microphones, and Zoom video off to prevent feedback while still allowing you to access the various Zoom features. Also, please be sure to turn on your table microphones when speaking to ensure that everyone in the room and on Zoom can hear you. We have IT folks here to help us as needed. I'd like to ask those of you joining virtually to keep your video on as much as possible and your audio off unless you're speaking. Please use the hand raise function if you'd like to speak. If you need technical assistance during any given session, please let our NSBO staff members know via the chat functions in Zoom. And Portia's sitting perfectly to my right here, so it'll all be seamless. Moving on to some housekeeping items. As you know, the commission was established in December and formally charged in February to, quote, assess the efficacy of the current merit review policy and associated criteria and processes at supporting NSF's mission. As there is an expectation to deliver recommendations to the board next May, we have to work strategically to meet our goal. NSF is responsible for the overall health of scientific and engineering research for the country. NSF's merit review process ensures that proposals are reviewed in a fair, competitive, transparent, and in-depth manner from this federal funding agency. While we can talk at length about this complex process, today's work is about exploring existing policy. Is the current policy best aligned with the agency's statutory obligations? If not, what changes should we consider? We plan to discuss policy implementation and accountability and the various stages of the merit review process at future meetings. So again, we have policy, we have implementation, and then we have accountability. And we're starting with policy first, then we'll move to implementation and accountability at future meetings. In the meantime, I hope you were able to review the reports and legislative documents added to tab 1 in Diligent, as they will provide useful background information for today's meeting. As I outlined during our work plan discussion last month, we will conduct research and consult with key stakeholders to help us identify knowledge gaps and barriers to effective policy. This information gathering will be conducted with the help of Commission staff and contractors. However, Commission members will be expected to fully participate in this process by sharing your perspectives, uncovering questions, and offering suggestions for key stakeholder and expert engagement. As a reminder, our work plan, as designed, is a dynamic one. It will continue to be updated as logistics and scope are developed. For example, the updated document, located in tab 1.5, now includes dates for biweekly Commission meetings. External factors may also impact our work plan and timeline, and we'll be sure to keep you aware and up to date of any changes. Your input and feedback, which we all expect and welcome, may also impact plans. As such, we ask that all Commission members arrive at each meeting fully prepared, having read all the materials staff have provided. We also welcome and look forward to receiving suggestions from you for additional reading. Wanda and I are committed to delivering a set of recommendations that will ensure the agency's mission is being met. We value your individual experiences and knowledge and will rely heavily on you to help us shape the direction of this reexamination. This is an enormous responsibility. It is also a collaborative process, and we look forward to working with each of you. Wanda, do you have any comments? Okay. Turning now to our discussion on merit review policy. As stated in the work plan, our goals for this year are to understand and consider potential changes to the current merit review process and criteria. Let's start with a look at the agency's mission. Okay. We have some slides here. They'll be a quiet moment. As mentioned last month, our approach will be to address policy, then implementation, then accountability, checking in on merit review principles at each juncture. However, the agency's mission to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense, and for other purposes, guides all NSF activities, including merit review. We intend to be guided by it in this re-examination as well. It will form the framework for our work. The mission is located in tab 1.7 of your diligent book for easy reference. We are compelled to 1, promote the progression of science, 2, advance the health, prosperity, and welfare of the nation and all within it, and 3, defend our nation through the identification and funding of science and engineering research and education projects. As proposers, reviewers, and program officers consider what is good science when writing, reviewing, and selecting proposals, they should keep this mission in mind. Our policies should help them do that. In addition to the mission, we should also keep in mind the agency's 2022 to 2026 strategic plan located in tab 1.8, inspired by the notion of, quote, a nation that leads the world in science and engineering research and innovation to the benefit of all without barriers to participation. NSF has developed here 4 strategic goals. 1, empowering STEM talent. 2, discovering new knowledge. 3, benefiting society. And 4, excelling at NSF operations and management. All of these provide guidance for those who support the agency's mission, including this commission. And of course, we have one of my favorites, the board's Vision 2030 report, located in tab 1.9, which lays out what we must do to remain a world leader in science and engineering by 1, delivering benefits of research, 2, developing STEM talent, 3, expansion of the geography of innovation, and 4, fostering a global community. This too offers us a foundation for our policy reexamination. NSF's strategic plan and NSF's vision, NSB's vision, both align with one another and the statutory mission. So as we ground our work in this mission, let us also remember key goals and values supporting the agency and the S&E ecosystem. With that in mind, I'll now hand it over to Wanda to start us on our discussion.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. At this time, we'll now turn our attention to our merit review criteria. In February, we talked about the evolution of the criteria Today, the two criteria used to evaluate proposals submitted to NSF, that is intellectual merit and broader impacts, were established by the board and remain nearly unchanged since 1997. These criteria, which proposers must also write to, are articulated via the agency's primary merit review policy document, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, known as the PAPG. Relevant excerpts from the PAPG are located in tab 110 of your board book. So it's been over 10 years since their last examination, and there's a lot to address. So let's use the next 50 minutes exploring each criterion so that we may all begin to have a common understanding. Next slide. Starting with intellectual merit, this criterion is defined as the potential to advance knowledge. So we'd like to open it up. What does the potential to advance knowledge mean to you? Julia?
Yeah, one of the things that struck me as I read all of this material, I had been told in the course of a conversation that this one was really about the fundamental science and the quest for, pushing back the knowledge in that regard. But this is much broader than that. And I think it's because when I started talking about engineering and things like that, people said, oh, no, that's over in broader impacts. And this tells me it is not.
Thank you. Thank you. Others?
I think one of the things that stands out there is the word potential, right? So at the time of proposal, the promise of a study to be able to advance knowledge, which is related to but separable from the issue of accountability post-award, I think.
I thought about it differently when I was a PI.
Say more.
Pardon me?
Say more.
Same. No, in my field, which is science related to agriculture, but it's basic science, it was difficult making that connection to the agency because so many of the reviewers said, no, he's a plant guy, belongs over there. This is 45 years ago. So it's different because we had to sort of stretch because we never knew what the reviewers would want. And so you didn't ascribe to this, you ascribed to what the reviewers would want, right? And so knowing that the challenge was to make my science relevant, it was easy for me to see it and to write it, but it's often poorly received at the other end because it was seen as potentially too applied. But it had relevance. I knew it did, but it was difficult. So you're biased by who you know is going to see it. And so this is a great phrase, but I never felt it really worked. So I'm glad to see that the changes in what we're trying to, and then through these documents that as Steve said, everything's there if you read it. And you've heard it several times, a number of times over the years through these various documents, but it never quite seemed like it was being playing out in my space.
Mm-hmm.
I should say, though, that the faculty of Washington U also were skeptical that I was actually doing applied research in a biology department.
Thank all of you for those excellent comments. We've heard about what the potential could portend and what advanced knowledge means. Is the IM criterion, intellectual merit criterion, as currently defined, sufficient to achieve NSF's mission? Which part of the mission? If not, what do you think should be changed, if anything? As currently defined, is the IM criterion sufficient to achieve NSF's mission?
It seems like the alternative would be to go from a concise, all-encompassing statement to something very, very broad, and we might be revising this for the rest of our careers and our descendants. So we might quibble with some of the specific wording, but my feeling would be to keep it at this broad level.
Thank you, Steve. Julie?
But I think the other thing that, if I heard your question right, is this sufficient in and of itself? And I think that all of us at this point would say no, because, I mean, you can advance knowledge, you can have the potential to advance knowledge in areas where, it is either a minuscule advance. So I think they're getting at that possibly transformational and how far we want to push there. But also, who cares? And if it's 3 other people working in your field, maybe doesn't meet the bar. So I think there are other things around that beyond this.
Thank you, Julia.
I
Chair
might-
Kay?
I might just add that the broad statement of intellectual merit encompassing potential to advance knowledge is accompanied by those 5 specific questions that are asked in reviewing according to each criterion, right? And so I think the issue in particular that Julia just mentioned about transformational research is picked up in those 5 sort of sub-questions.
In the elements?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Steve will talk about that shortly, the delineation of the elements. Good observation. May I ask then, who should commission members hear from to better understand the IM criterion? Who should help inform our deliberations as we review, as we re-examine? Roger?
Well, as we wrote the report, the 2030 report, we asked for futurists to give us some input so they could help us look out way further. I don't think we got the right ones, actually. But I mean, there's so much knowledge to be gained that I think it has to be reined. I think there's a reining in that's needed, but you'd like the brightest and the best as well as the workers in the field. So it's a broad question, but I'm surely, like others in this room, committed to the discovering really novel information, but a relevance someplace.
Very helpful. Kayvon?
Thank you. So one of the things I've been thinking about is we have this 4-part NSB vision in 2030, in the Vision 2030, one of which is accelerating the delivery of research benefits. And as we undertake this exercise, I've been trying to overlay that piece of the Vision 2030 with the IM, BI, where in all, is it in IM, is it in BI? How do we, if accelerating the delivery of research benefits is a board vision priority, where do we situate it? And I wonder if that question might help inform who we ask to help us think about the IM piece.
I think some insight into your excellent question also will be revealed as we probe further with regard to the elements, but let's keep that prominently on the table so in fact that we do address this. Thank you. Just a couple of other questions to probe our thinking. What does advancing knowledge actually look like? And then a second question, just to put on the table for our thought. How much value should be placed on advancing new knowledge? Should all knowledge be new? What about replication studies, example? I see some head nods, so people are thinking. Matt?
All right, I just pick up on that. I had not thought about that before, but replication studies are more important than most people realize in science. And also, it's kind of related to the publication bias that I see very strongly in many fields, that people are not going to publish a negative result, or a result maybe that didn't come out the way people wanted it to or were expecting it to, and for fear of their career advancement and future funding and things like that. And that's a serious loss or threat to science. So I don't know if it has to go here, but we ought to make it clear that we understand that, and that we don't want to push only to support the flashiest results that sort of conform to what we were expecting. So it kind of gets into originality also, which has got to be an important criteria. But so I totally agree with what you said.
But replicability does advance knowledge in the sense that, it gives you higher confidence in something that was previously reported and perhaps believed to be true on pretty good grounds, but may or may not stand up to the test of time and further examination. I mean, there's all kinds of knowledge. There is scientific knowledge, there is engineering knowledge, there is manufacturing knowledge, there is knowledge about how kids learn and how you grow the next generation so that they have the potential to advance knowledge. So and there is knowledge that Newton's laws of gravity are at this point pretty well accepted. There are other things that are less accepted, and you need more evidence to be able to establish the believability.
Yvonne, thank you.
I think we do have to acknowledge, I mean, I think one of the reasons that we're undertaking this exercise is because what we write here and how we write it directly informs how program officers, program directors think about these things. And I think we have to acknowledge that there has been, in my experience, there has been a kind of a lore within the foundation. As a PI, as a prospective PI, you contact a program director and you say, I have this idea. Can you give me some thoughts on how well this fits with this program solicitation? And in my experience, there is this sort of sense that what you propose or how you propose it, there has to have this sense of shiny and new about it. That if it's a little bit too much like something that has been done before, there's a little bit of a pushback on that. So I think we do need to acknowledge that exists, that sense exists. And so if we want to explicitly enable the kinds of studies that we're talking about that maybe too often get overlooked or are devalued, I think we may need to think about language that specifically enables that.
We're pleased that our board chair is with us this morning, Dan Reed. Dan?
Thanks. Just a couple quick thoughts. And first of all, let me again say thank you for being willing to do this. This is one of the most important things the board does. And just a couple quick thoughts. I do think the standards of reproducibility vary widely across disciplines of science. And so there are some questions about trying to equilibrate some of those cultures. My energy physics friends will regularly remind me about 5 nines reproducibility. That's quite rare in some other disciplines. And it also affects the number of retractions and work built on things that didn't stand up to closer scrutiny. I wanted to connect, though, to something that Yvonne just said, because it is true there's a real culture inside NSF. It applies in academia as well, because what we write down on paper about academic success for promotion and tenure, how we actually do it, they're not quite the same thing. And if you don't understand the unwritten lore, you will not be successful. And so I do think as we talk about these issues, the words matter, but how we translate them into the operating culture really does matter, perhaps even more, because that will determine what happens in truth on the ground. But thank you again, delighted to be here and mostly just to listen.
Thank you, Dan. Sarah Kay?
Yeah, I would just add a bit on the issue of typologies of knowledge that I'm thinking about a document that NSF and the U.S. Department of Education Institute of Education Sciences released in, I want to say 2013. It sort of distinguishes 6 major buckets or genres of research, each of which has different goals with respect to knowledge creation. So, early stage exploratory, the most basic or use-inspired basic, up to R and development, efficacy testing, effectiveness testing, and then scale-up research. So I think, the notion of advancing knowledge is very broad and does indeed encompass reproducibility and replication. What may vary is a particular call from time to time, or a particular program may be more centered in, say, the foundational research, use-inspired research area than another, which may be more focused on efficacy or effectiveness testing. So I think there's a range there.
Very helpful. I made a connection between Matt's earlier point and Kayvon's point that the idea, the proposal has to be shiny enough to capture the program officers and the reviewers' attention. Matt also said something that we have found historically to be quite true. The proposer is submitting something that he or she thinks has a chance of being funded. And so, for example, negative results nobody really wants to talk about. There has been discussion about what could be considered extremely blue sky, well thought out science that also may not capture the reviewers or the program. Too shiny. Groupthink is what we frequently talk about. So as we consider our policy language, let's keep that range in mind also. Any other thoughts on intellectual merit? We can move on to further discussion of broader impacts. Okay, as you know, broader impacts is defined as the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. What does the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes mean to you? We have the word again, potential. Benefiting society, what does that mean? And contributing to the achievement. Sarah Kay?
Just maybe relate back again to different expectations for different types of knowledge, time frame within which broader societal outcomes might be achieved. For a more basic or use-inspired basic program, the understanding might be that it could be decades before something would be ready to make difference in practice. For other kinds of research programs, they would have much more proximal societal outcomes. So it depends on the type of knowledge that we seek to produce.
I think it's changed. I think that's right, but I think in the last decade, 5 years in particular, at least for us, there's been a greater impact, an increased revelation or acceptance of the education impact and the STEM workforce impact. Although it was mentioned in a number of reports before, I think it's really, we're on the ground now saying this is an important component. And I hadn't appreciated that as a PI. And I think that's a nice change to have seen in the agency, that we really are working for a workforce development program. So as I read these again, I'm thinking about the change that happened over the last number of years. And it's really been nice to see that change towards capacity building, which we were sort of giving lip service to, is now a real thing, especially through this committee's work. So I think when I did it your way, and the way that you said, and I thought about it as writing an application, it's now, I would write it differently now, because the foundation expects a greater focus on societal benefit that's not just technology transfer.
And one of the things, there are a couple things. One is, this is incredibly broad. And while advancing knowledge, presumably there is some standard that doesn't change that much. I mean, there may be some things that evolve over time. This one really has the potential to change over time depending on what society particularly needs at the time. Or what society has come to recognize in some cases. So that's important. Probably the biggest takeaway from all the pre-reading we did was that concept, and I don't know to what extent it's done, that this one might be best viewed across an entire portfolio instead of project by project, particularly for the smaller projects. And I have no clue whether that's done at all, or whether panel reviews. I mean, I think the panel reviews is potentially, I don't want to get too far ahead of where we are, but potentially an approach to this, but I suspect it's not done particularly in the way panel reviews are done now. But that concept of looking at a portfolio and does it in aggregate approach what is desired here, I think is something that was the biggest takeaway for me as a concept that we need to think about going forward.
Again, we'll talk about this more when Steve talks about the elements, but for purposes of clarification, and Sarah Kay, you can help us from the NSF side. My understanding is both criteria have to be assessed during the time of review. And my understanding is if, for example, within the abstracts, both criteria aren't described, then proposals are returned. Is that the case, do you recall?
It's been a while since I was a
Okay.
program director.
All
I
right.
don't know the current position
All
on
right.
return without review. So.
I do know there's an emphasis that the proposer, at the time the proposal comes in, both criteria have to be spoken to in the description.
Yeah, I think that's the way I understand it. Julie, I'm not sure that, interested in the concept of have a portfolio review and look for a total outcome rather than individual. It's not certainly, I mean, that was an interesting suggestion, but
Yeah,
I would like-
it's in what we read.
as a portfolio matter. I didn't
As
see
a
that.
portfolio, particularly for the small projects.
Right.
Because, if you have a 300K grant, how much can you do in this area?
My understanding was you have to do something, and that something has to be as
Yeah.
good.
But if
should
everybody-
be as good as an IM.
But if everybody and his dog is working in the same part of broader impacts, is that really what you want?
I find that question the most crucial one, because how much variation on the theme can you have in certain space, in certain disciplines?
We will clarify that as we go through our discussion this morning. It may be the reference is to that projects have to be evaluated in the aggregate in contrast to the broader impacts consideration. Our understanding is that all proposals and awards must address both of these criteria, but it'll become clearer as we move through. A couple of other interesting questions for us to consider. Again, who should the commission members hear from to better, understand the BI criteria, but also how is potential to advance knowledge different from potential to benefit society? Let's take that latter one first, and then we'll come back to hearing. How is potential to advance knowledge different from potential to advance, from potential to benefit society?
I hate to, please, other people start talking. Anyway, at some level, advancing knowledge and reporting it in a scholarly journal is a great thing, but in my opinion, and this is probably partially because of my engineering and application bent, if you don't go the further step of saying, and what difference does it make to the population at large, you haven't really finished your work. And there are lots of different ways you can do that, but that I think is at least how I come at it.
Steve?
Scott. It's okay.
Scott, yes, yes, yes.
Reading through the legislation particularly and the breakdown of the specifics of what the writers of that legislation wanted to see in broader impacts evaluated, I was struck almost that, gee, this is actually getting more clear than intellectual merit in a lot of ways. And it's as if BI was meant to pick up everything except that specific intellectual knowledge advancement. So trying to explain, oh, this is all the benefits that can flow from this, and please articulate or emphasize that as opposed to just publishing in a journal. And I think through this, we need to be careful because there, on the one hand, there's the definition like we have here of these are broader impacts, or this is what covers it. But the legislation is telling us this is what you'll do, and somewhere in there too is, and you'll report on it. So we need to be a bit careful that we're reconciling through our discussions and then back into what we're required to do by the legislation.
Thank you for that observation. And we will recall that for both intellectual merit and broader impacts, it was very helpful. A range of representative examples were listed of what BI might consist of. That doesn't require that proposers have to address each of those, or that that's the full list of compelling broader impacts that can be spoken to. But those representative examples were cited to sort of give the proposer and reviewer an appreciation, to your point that it varies quite considerably to still warrant compelling broader impacts. Roger?
Just a comment, it strikes me that one is intellectual merit would be more regional and global, whereas the the broader impacts are local. There's an opportunity for global with the broader impacts, but a lot of what we do is a local impact, an immediate local impact, whether it's education or writing or conferences.
One example comes to mind is the current pandemic through which we're going. A phenomenal amount of basic science and engineering and innovation were developed during this period, but the knowledge gained had very important societal impacts. It saved lives.
But so much of what we do on individual grants is not as impactful as that example. So I think review needs to recognize the local impact, and then that's what hits me here too. This is mostly what we do on broader impacts is that there is a potential for the big guy, the global impact.
Yes. All right, we'll continue that thought and thinking through that. Thank you for that. Any other current thoughts? To return to Sarah Kay.
Might just go back to clarify, clearly each proposal must address both of the criterion, but to Julia's point, I was scanning quickly. The PAPG and the direction there is that NSF projects in the aggregate should contribute more broadly to achieving societal goals. So it is in the aggregate.
I'm not sure about that. Let's move to another question. How much value should be placed on advancing new knowledge? I'm misreading here. How much value should be placed on specific societal outcomes? Should certain societal outcomes be valued over others? This is just food for thought. We're considering these various possibilities.
I have a thought on this.
Kayvon?
So let me just say, I'm gonna be riffing on this theme, I think, throughout our work together. So let me just make this very clear. if Vision 2030 is the board's vision and it articulates, beautifully, these sort of 4 aspects, in all of these questions and in everything we're doing together on this commission, I am asking myself, how do we make Vision 2030 real? And specifically, how do we make it real within the merit review criteria? And so, to the question you just asked, Vision 2030 identifies a couple of fairly specific societal impacts and outcomes that have been elevated as especially important. Talent development, the missing millions, the geography of innovation. My view is that if we've bothered to articulate a vision with specific components, then we should bother to imprint them on this most important thing that the foundation does, and that's its merit review.
And I think that is much more articulate than what I said earlier, but with broader impacts, the concept that this would evolve as societal needs evolve, and one assumes that the vision was trying to be responsive to societal needs that we see now.
And as a staff, when we sort of flesh this out and look at what the sort of highlighted broader impacts are, we also need to keep in mind what the Congress has mandated, because I believe there are certain broader impacts that are congressionally mandated as well.
Thank you, Steve. Kayvon?
I just want, Steve, could you elaborate on that point? Are there currently congressionally mandated impacts that are different from or distinct from or that go beyond the Vision 2030?
Yeah,
ones?
Ann, do you want to speak to that? The COMPARE Act, I think.
Sure, there are 9 or 10. Speak. There are about 9 or 10 impacts in the statute of which we are highlighting, as has been noted. We see some as being more critical right at the moment. But for example, there are increased national security is one of them, and that is important. It's not one that we highlighted in our vision, but we certainly need to keep that in mind. Increased partnerships, not something that's one of the 4 vision quadrants, but it is important, and CHIPS, I think, speaks to that even more strongly, as does our TIP directorate. So nothing is contrary, but the vision raised a few things that we wanted to highlight specifically.
Could we ask John for additional comment?
Thanks, Roger. The statutory language is also not limiting. So it is a suggestion from Congress, one that should be paid attention to, but it is not binding. And it reflects the congressional process, which is also one of compromising on priorities. So, I think different members of Congress and Congresses at different times, this was edited in both 2010 and 2017, have prioritized things a little bit differently. But the overlap of the Venn diagrams of vision and the congressional intent or language around broader impacts, it's very good, in part because both are very broad. So you have latitude within that.
And we actually were pleased that it was such a, that there was good overlap. We don't know who had influence on whom, but it didn't matter because we got to the same place.
Thank you.
I just have a quick comment. I have my hand up. I'm not sure anybody saw it. Pardon me. So
please, Candace.
Thank you, Wanda. The current criteria are, I think, we're designed to be very broad and inclusive of many things that we've been talking about. And I just wanted to mention that within specific solicitations, there are solicitation-specific criteria that address more specific societal outcomes that may be desired from any given program.
That's very helpful.
So does that speak to Julia's question earlier about whether or not there were programmatic goals? Would you restate that? Because it triggered something in my mind.
There may be solicitation-specific criteria, either in broader impact or intellectual merit, that are designed to address specific outcomes desired from any given program.
Thank you.
Does that help? Yeah, thanks.
So people put forward, again, this is early days, so we don't, having the commission understand the process is an important goal of the initial work that we're doing. People put in proposals that have both an intellectual merit and a broader impact component. Those are scored individually.
Individually and holistically, yeah.
Okay, so it's holistically across a single project, holistically across a portfolio of projects?
So reviewers will be asked to comment on those 5. I think it was mentioned that you were going to talk about the elements, the
Yes,
5
ma'am.
elements under each, yeah. And those are considered holistically in coming up with a assessment of the proposal overall.
Okay, so there's 1 score for a proposal that comes out, or 2 scores?
It's not a score, it's not numeric, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And one thing that I'd like to understand going forward was this idea of the in aggregate and how do you assess the in aggregate for a particular portfolio or across NSF at large. I mean, however it is done, that is an interesting thing that seems like it ought to be relevant and ought to be considered at some level. And learning more about how that is done, if it's done, would be helpful.
Oh, I think you're right. As we begin this process, there's so much learning for us as a board to understand exactly how it's done, and 27 years of experience by the NSF in putting this all together is something that we will enjoy learning about. Okay, so there's no numbers. There's a holistic decision made. Got it.
Sarah Kay, is the ranking still such that there's a 5-level Sarah Kay ranking of excellent, very good, good, fair, poor, or how does the ranking go now as opposed to numeric scores?
It has been sufficiently long since I was a program director. I am sorry, I don't know. Maybe Candace could speak to that.
And there are some of those of us who wished it would be numeric,
Yeah.
like the NIH's. So that's always been a sticker in some ways, because we know that program managers have enough flexibility to balance a portfolio. If you're on the cusp, often it's that. So I appreciate the need to clarify and why we're doing it in group, because there is a portfolio importance. I mean, importance of portfolio balance, rather than just a numeric, which is harder to move around than the general.
What we may want to do is ask Alicia to put together a session that would just explain to us how the whole process works from a practical standpoint.
I absolutely agree. I think having that clarified to those who have input, I mean, who are our stakeholders, will be very useful, because I found myself often, several times on the cusp, and for a reason or another, there's always this move it forward and move it down a little bit.
John?
John?
Just briefly with the point of information, the Merit Review Digest has traditionally considered the holistic scores in both numerical and textual language. So it's a scale of 1, which is poor, to 5, which is excellent. And it's dealt in those numbers for some time.
Thank you for clarifying, John.
If I may jump in, just going back to Sarah Kay's point about the scoring and ranking. There are different scoring rubrics that can be used. They may be numeric, they may be excellent to poor, as in the ad hoc reviews. They could be a rating on a competitive scale from highly competitive to not competitive. But whatever the scale that's used in a given program, the most important thing is that whatever the outcome is simply a shorthand for the content that is in the panel summary. So the score itself is much less important than the actual comments and feedback from the panel to the program and to the PI. So that, and there may be strengths and weaknesses in there that in aggregate are captured in an average, but there may be that the diversity of strengths and weaknesses may not be easily captured in a single score.
Very helpful. Thank you for that clarification. Further clarification, Candace. Are there, go ahead. Certainly, we want to thank everyone for this informative and probing discussion. There has been a persistent perception that broader impacts is confusing and unclear, while intellectual merit is well understood. I think it's clear that there is space in both criteria, based on your comments this morning, to think more deeply about what these criteria mean. Staff have been taking notes and will use your comments and questions to build future meeting agendas to help us clarify these two criteria. And I strongly support Steve's suggestion that we have Alicia OIA sort of like do a walkthrough what the entire process entails. If there are no other comments or questions, we will take a short break and 10-minute break. So it's about 5 after, if we can get back by 10:15, at which time Steve will lead us in a discussion about merit review elements, which have been spoken to earlier. Thank you.
Following the NSF's Staff Merit Review Task Force recommendations, in 1997, the board established intellectual merit and broader impacts as its review criteria. At the same time, the board also established a set of elements for each criteria, defined by questions to assist the reviewer and the proposers in understanding their intent. These are known either as the elements or as the questions. So we'll use that interchangeably. On slide 6, you'll see the questions asked in 1997 in consideration of intellectual merit were: how important is the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field and across different fields? How well qualified is the proposer to conduct the project? To what extent does the proposed activity suggest and explore creative and original concepts? And there's a note here: in 2007, the NSB Task Force on Transformative Research modified this element to include the consideration for potentially transformative concepts? And then how well conceived and organized is the proposed activity? For broader impacts, the questions were, how well does the activity advance discovery and understanding while promoting teaching, training, and learning? How well does the proposed activity broaden the participation of underrepresented groups? To what extent will it enhance the infrastructure for research and education? Will the results be disseminated broadly? What may be the benefits of a proposed activity to society? As you can see, many of these elements echo previous merit review criteria, which we went through during our February retreat. In an effort to further clarify the evaluation of the criteria, the 2011, our predecessor, NSB Task Force on Merit Review developed the elements that are in use today. In summary, reviewers were instructed to bear in mind what proposers plan to do, why they want to do it, how they plan to do it, how will they determine success, and what are the potential benefits of such success. We are now going to walk through each element and discuss how they provide guidance toward ultimately achieving NSF's mission. These elements can be found in tab 1.10.4 of your board book. Remember that these elements were meant to help clarify consideration of the criteria. So if you find any of the elements unclear, we should talk about this. Okay, let's start with the first element. What is the potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across different fields, and to benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes? Questions that we can ask ourselves are, how much potential to advance knowledge should a proposal have? If we can think about it in that way. Same for benefits to society. Should the potential to advance knowledge and the potential to benefit society be equivalent? And we started a little discussion about that earlier before the break in terms of how are the two areas of focus considered, and the answer appears to be holistically, but are there rankings done by the reviewers based on broader impacts, for example, across the portfolio? These are questions that we'll want to ask when Alicia sets up the meeting with reviewers that sounds like we all are interested in doing. What do you think of these questions? Advancing knowledge and understanding within its own field or across intellectual merit.
Strikes me as kind of like the definition of fine art. I know it when I see it.
Yes.
Ditto. I think they're so loaded that and depends on who you've got on that committee. I mean, on that review panel, and who the program manager is. Mm-hmm. And that's, how do you score potential? And in whose eyes? And mm-hmm. I'd love to have some quantitation around potential. Mm-hmm. We keep trying to quantitate.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Really?
Right. Exactly.
Because
we've been asking over and over in the board to quantitate outcome.
Yeah.
And outcome starts here.
Mm-hmm. What I back when I was making these decisions, not in the NSF context, the kind of the rough rubric I was using was that, the more expensive the bet, in other words, the larger the proposal, the greater the promise had to be that you would get something really good coming out of it. And if it was not very much, then you could perhaps take a flyer or do something that was a bit more incremental. But if you were really putting a lot of money into it, then right, there were two pieces. One is, given my rubric, I probably wouldn't have invested in LIGO, but of course I wasn't party to those conversations. Because you want reasonable assurance that you're going to get something really good out of it. And it's not at all clear to me that LIGO fit in that category. And so that's the transformative piece. And, most of us aren't are relatively conservative when it comes to that kind of decision.
Given that by mission, the foundation's responsibility is to support STEM research and education across all fields, we always have to keep in mind there's considerable variation across disciplines in how much financial support is required to move the needle quite a bit within those respective domains. For example, mathematics, or particularly in the context of social, behavioral, and economic sciences. Historically, those important fields don't require as much financial investment as the demonstrated importance of the work that is proposed. So there's a lot of variation across disciplines and domains when we think about how much it costs to support excellent work.
I might ask, just on the second part there, benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes. How intentional is that word "or"? I'll come back to the Vision 2030. Vision 2030 has fairly specific societal outcomes that are identified as priorities. And so, in that context anyway, I'm not sure that Vision 2030 envisions an "or" there. Rather, it envisions advancing desired societal outcomes.
And increasingly, it's across fields. Rather than advancing a single field, it's across the fields, because the chance of having societal benefits are greater if you, we assumed we are convicted that it's a greater likelihood of societal benefits by going across fields. And though we left room for a specific field, we also suggested that, urged that there be more cross-disciplinary activity. But that's the balance. How much do you stay within a single field or go across? And I think the same thing is in broader impacts.
And so there would be a higher ranking based on whether it went across different fields.
No, we simply open more opportunity for cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, cross-field applications, which were relatively, were not as embraced in earlier years of the NSF. It's been a good transition to encourage more cross-disciplinary research, knowing the complexity of the university and of life, and et cetera, et cetera. But there was that dialogue about whether or not, how much should be could be within a field.
Seth?
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from 1997, is it correct, Stephen? All this current merit review elements. Is there any way we have measured some of the proposals got funded, whether they made an impact, at least some way to figure out whether this advanced original decisions made was tracking them, or is it available inside within NSF? Or is it not relevant to our current discussion? You can, I'll stop that's it.
That's huge.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. It is. It's not part of this policy.
Okay.
Here, we're talking about the policy, then the implementation, then the accountability.
Okay, thank you.
And your comments are related both to implementation and to accountability, particularly accountability. So again, I want us all to have sort of a working hypothesis as we go through, because the incredible complexity of this can only be appreciated if we can begin to put it into buckets. And so in the same way we've got the criteria and the elements and the principles, we've got the policy, we've got the implementation, and we've got the accountability. And I think what you're talking about is definitely part of our mandate here. And we're looking forward to that part of our mission.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the second element.
Can I just say on this one though, Steve, I think
Yeah.
this is the chance of advancing as a consequence of advancing knowledge, advancing societal benefits, will benefit from a structure at the NSF that shows programs that are multidisciplinary, that have wide, broader scientific capability to assess innovation or success applications. Will more likely succeed if those panels are in fact very widely, not all specific for a discipline, right?
Right.
Biology panel should have chemists on it, and physicists and biophysicists, as well as biologists. So how we define our success will depend upon the structure of those panels and of the individuals that run them. Right?
Right. Okay.
Speaking of which, having plowed through a bunch of things for the A&F committee this time, like renewals, and I have asked about review by broader impacts experts. It's not happening at that level, and those are big things. And yeah, there's all kinds of outreach and this, that, and the other thing, but the subject matter experts are subject matter experts in the research and the facility that's being done, not on, how do you have the most impactful, broader impact effort. And so I know I'm getting the cart ahead of the horse, but this is a huge deal. The board opined that we should have broader impacts experts on the COVs. That's way after the horse has left the barn. So anyway, just wanted to get that out there.
I just wanted to opine a little bit around broader impacts, that this is a place where what we really want is impact. And so there is tension between the novelty that we look for in the basic research and what I would say our goal in broader impacts is to have real impact. And so novelty that doesn't actually work isn't really useful. So how we think about it really has impact, I think, is important, and that's something to keep in mind. I think that's distinct from, because we've talked often in the board about how do we make sure that we do things that actually move the needle and not just our social feelings. And I think this is a place where this really matters. I'll just end opining.
All right, let's move to the next slide. Here we go. This works perfectly in with what you were talking about, Dan. Explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts. I think that absolutely works with regard to intellectual merit, and it's misplaced with regard to potentially very important aspects of broader impacts.
I mean, if we need new impacts, if there is not known mechanisms that make impact, novelty is really important. But if there are proven techniques that work, why not build on those?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was just going to comment that I think, Steve, what you just said, I think you said it very well. Coming back to something I said earlier about kind of the, how things get implemented, and I realize we're going to talk about implementation later, but again, I have had the experience as a PI, and I've heard from colleagues as well that within the broader impacts component, that that there has been a sense that you will fail if what you propose on broader impacts is seen as, well, that's been done before, that's been demonstrated. Right? Where's the novelty? Where's the shiny new thing? And indeed, especially when it comes to impact, if impact is a goal, indeed, you may very well want to point to best practice.
I had exactly the same the feeling as I read that, Kevon, because I mean, that's why I mentioned earlier, impact is often local, and why not learn from what worked in Tulsa will also work in Bozeman or Seattle. I mean, just the active implementation is as important as a novelty in some cases.
On the other hand, I think we want to be open to novel approaches. I mean, when I think about, just as an example, the joint program between Fisk and Vanderbilt that Kevon knows a whole lot more about than I do, for getting Blacks and African Americans into physics through a non-traditional for majority populations path. That was really out there, and it's been very successful. And, I would hope that we would be open to something like that, hasn't been done before, as well as the tried and true. On the other hand, if people don't have a great novel idea, then the tried and true is definitely a good way to go.
Okay, let's move on. This one strikes me as a little bit of motherhood and apple pie, but it's proposed activities are well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on a sound rationale. I think that applies to everything we try to do. So that
Except the measurement.
Good point.
Does the plan incorporate a mechanism to it?
Yes.
That's a tough one, especially.
And is it carried out?
Right.
Even more important, at least as important.
Yeah, quantitating outcome of broader impacts is often sort of left off the bottom. Mm-hmm. I've done it. I don't know how to measure it, but I did it. Yeah, we spent the money.
I do think there's a bit of a distinction there, though, again, thinking about the potential to, right? The promise of, at the time of proposal, one would consider whether there is a plan that is incorporated saying this is what we would do in order to, but then post-award assessment of what may be implemented and what may be achieved from that. Seems to me that it's a bit of a bright line there.
I am curious to know how many of those that write their final report do just what you said. If I had more money, if it's extended, this is what I would do next. Because it would mean they've at least thought about it, and that it's been a useful exercise. Yeah, thanks.
Let's go on to the third element.
Sorry, could I just ask, just to be clear, was the sentiment that we just heard is that the first question is maybe sort of fluff, but the second question is an important one.
I think at
I
least
would
that's what,
definitely not say the first one is fluff, right? It's looking at the,
well, it certainly is important, but which is the one we're questioning. That's what I took from this. Are we questioning them the same way?
sorry, I guess the point I was trying to make is just the assessment at the time
Yeah.
of proposal based on what is intended to be done in order to assess mechanisms for success. You know, some programs may have requirements on project-specific evaluation plans, some may not, but that there would be woven into the proposal an intention to assess success, saying this is what I expect to achieve, this is the plan that I will use to monitor whether or not I am achieving that. I think it's a bit different from what is actually achieved post-award. Sorry if that was confusing.
And this goes to your foreshadowing of the accountability, Suresh, because I am very interested in how the reports come out of the completed programs, particularly with regard to broader impacts. We have had a great deal of difficulty getting data about whether people achieve the goals that they set for themselves and broader impacts. And I think that's an area where we can contribute as a commission to that process. And I think we can point out that this element does include a mechanism to assess success. And that should drive some of those conversations. All right.
If I may add in.
Please.
Some of the, I know it's an applied proposals, you do have a milestone reporting every quarter comes in, hey, we have done that. Is there any way we can implement that? Or it's again, out of its implementation side? That's a way to think about it.
Yeah, why don't make it, the advantages, the staff are taking notes and whatever right now.
Okay.
So what, did you have any further thoughts on that?
No, just like for, if you have this like incorporated mechanisms to assess success, within the NSF, there is for each project, there's a kind of milestones attached to it, data. And then every time the PI finishes it, yeah, I did it, no, it's working on it. Is there any way to kind of keep giving the feedback so that over a period of next 10 years or so, we start collecting. It doesn't mean that we are going to deny the proposals, but it's a way of policy, like tracking the progress made, even if it is difficult to track them. So just way of getting some data from the PI, that's it.
I could jump in here for a moment. I think it might be interesting to think about how this question intersects with the idea of risk and having risk as part of the portfolio, and you know, and this idea of evaluating potential and seeing potential. But it's a tricky question when you think about how to evaluate mechanisms for success. And I think one thing that no one wants is to impose a framework that pushes conservatism only as part of it, that a portfolio, a responsible portfolio, includes a variety of topics, both within the intellectual merit and broader impacts and on the risk spectrum. We don't want to discourage that.
That's a very helpful point. Thank you. Do you have any ideas, particularly how we could avoid that risk or that inability to? It would seem to me that perhaps addressing your question, the idea is to increase the discretion to the program reviewer. Would that be the solution to the issue you raised?
I'm not sure what the solution is, but I know that the concept of high risk, high reward has been something that's been considered in programs and at the program merit review level for a long time, and as we've also instructed panelists to consider in their comments in their panel summaries. So I do think it's something that needs to be kept on the table. But the idea is, back to Sarah Kay's point about potential, and even the language that's in the current policy about potential, that not eliminating that, because it's very important.
Thank you. Moving on to the fourth element. Again, this goes to qualifications of the individuals, teams, or organizations. This one is one that somewhat concerns me, because if it would have a tendency to devolve a great deal of our money to R1 institutions, it would seem to me. If the organization's qualifications are paramount, it's sort of the rich get richer and the poor don't benefit. So I would actually think there might be at least a broader impact benefit, and perhaps even an intellectual merit impact of having organizations which are not as well developed, and given them the opportunity to participate more fully. What do you folks think of that? Matt?
Agreed with your point. Could I suggest maybe a sort of a compromise modification of this? For example, there are a lot of these criteria say, how well is this? Like they're trying to quantify something which is very difficult to quantify, and it's a high bar. What if this criterion read something like, I'm just making this up, is the individual, team, organization qualified to conduct the proposed activities, or has a plan or potential to achieve that? So that they will be able to be qualified. But we don't have to get into quantifying it and saying, are they well enough qualified? Because I agree. If you say, well, they're pretty well qualified, but this R1 Old Boys Network proposal is more qualified, I agree. We should maybe change this to avoid that.
Yeah, the only caveat on this is that, there are significant requirements over and above whether the PI or the team is qualified to perform the research. And, a lot of what the IG finds are with institutions that historically have not received much NSF funding. And so I think there needs to be some kind of qualifier, as in, our support structures in place to ensure that, everything can be done decently and in order, if you like. And that doesn't mean that the proposing team necessarily has to have all of that, but there needs to be the infrastructure in place, either at the institution or in partnering with other institutions or help from the foundation itself to make sure that that stuff gets done properly, because the foundation and a lot of other people can be in a world of hurt if it's not.
Could I maybe just add, building on both what Matthew and Julia just said, the notion of wanting to ensure that the team individual team or organization are in a position to actually execute what they've proposed, so that potential could realistically be expected to be achieved, right? And when you were talking about infrastructure and support, Julia, I was thinking of things like in my directorate, STEM education, we have a program which is the building capacity in STEM education research. So if someone came in with a proposal, and it might be a wonderful idea, and it might be an extraordinarily well-designed methodology, et cetera, but one might have questions about whether the team had the qualifications to execute, there could be a recommendation to say you might want to consider applying for this kind of funding in order to become better prepared to do that next stage of work. So I don't know that all of it necessarily needs to be addressed through a single proposal, but thinking about a trajectory of support.
To Sarah Kay's point, I believe across a number of programs, there are stages of proposing for the ultimate work. That is, a number of programs allow for planning grants, both for individuals and teams and the organization to sort of strengthen itself to be more competitive for the larger programmatic activity, if you will. There is consideration also to be given to the stage of development of the institution, if you will. There is recognition that a number of institutions are in emerging capacity, and I think that is one of the things that the granted program is designed to address. And so there is an assumption of responsibility on the part of the foundation, recognizing that some institutions, for a variety of reasons, are just in different stages of capacity to compete successfully to achieve the ultimate programmatic goal. But structures are put in place by the foundation and others to strengthen the capacity, particularly of the institutions, the organization, to compete more competitively, to produce excellent whatever, and reach its goal.
That's helpful. Is there a section that is for the new PI, a person who has not proposed before, or someone from another institute, from an emerging institution? Is there a special section in the call that says, if you are here, it might be of use to do this to strengthen your application? That is, make sure you have that support, or request support for ensuring conduct is measured or helped for success. And this is usually done by the institution, but in some institutions they're just weaker, right? So I wonder if adding a section would be helpful to the emerging PI, not an emerging institution, but an emerging PI.
So Roger, can I ask a clarification? You're asking for a feedback mechanism coming from after the review?
Often you don't need the feedback. I mean, you might need a call to your program manager to say, I've got this, does it look complete? But it urges the emerging PI to take specific note of these. If I'm at an institution that is an emerging institution, if I'm a new PI, never granted before, and I just came off a postdoc, but I'm a little bit concerned that I will fit, consultations and additional instructions. We'll often assume that the PI knows what the heck he's doing, but the first one is not always. How many times do you have to fail before you succeed? For a lot of PIs, just 3 and 4 times. Even at R1s.
To Roger, some of the program managers do give feedback in NSF, I've noticed. And then also there's one other element which you sometimes forget is the review committee keeps changing, even in the same PI with modified proposal comes.
Exactly. That's the issue. And informing, that's part of the issue. Informing the emerging PI that he or she has I mean, this is what's looked for. Yes, this will change. How do you make it successful across changing personnel in a study section or in a review section?
You've asked an important question, Roger, and I don't know the exact answer to that. I don't know if Candace can help us with that. I do know that historically, one mechanism that NSF has used, and there may be more specific ones exactly to address your point, but exposure through the review process, participating on review panels. Early career scientists, for example, get exposure to what some of the most competitive thinking is, whether it's in the research and education, not a grooming, but an exposure, a socialization to what constitute competitive.
Right.
But your question is an excellent one that we need to get a clear understanding on.
Because many of the emerging institutions also have heavy teaching requirement, and getting off to do a study section or be on a panel for a couple of years is not easy. So anyway, hand-holding it a little bit more, but not babying someone. It's a difference.
If I could add here, just to mention a few of the ways that we do reach out and engage more inexperienced PIs and institutions, and offer advice from the program directors. I mean, Wanda makes an excellent point in that being part of the review process is one of the best learning tools. And so we actively do try to recruit people whenever possible from early career and institutions that may be underrepresented in our system, of which there are many. Other mechanisms are through regional NSF days, where institutions are invited to, for a full day of informational sessions about the review process, about the organization, about NSF as an agency, where it fits in the federal context, all sorts of things to help PIs navigate our system. Many programs offer informational webinars about programs and many of these are specifically geared toward helping people who are less experienced in the system. And then finally, I think every program director spends a lot of time individually coaching people and encouraging. Our primary message in going out in an NSF day or a webinar is to reach out to the program directors for guidance about how to make a compelling case for your idea. And I hope that's helpful.
One other mechanism that Alicia raised at her speech at ARIS as a new program prospect, where a PO with a kernel of an idea is invited to just, I think it's email in rather than call, but I can check that, and just brainstorm with somebody at NSF. Do you have something here? So that could be a helpful tool too.
There's some support, longstanding existence. Often we think of MSIs because of the imbalance in resources and imbalance in infrastructure. But over the years, NSF has also worked with and invested non-research intensive, like liberal arts, colleges and the like. I know education in particular has programmatic activities to support that tier of institution so that they too get opportunity to advance the field. To Roger's point, some faculty have very heavy teaching loads, and it's just totally unrealistic to expect that they'll be able to do research or, in some instances, even educational development. But there are some opportunities that exist to better prepare and make these institutions and teams and individuals more competitive. But I think, again, one of the most recent ones is express attention to what's considered emerging institutions. through the granted program.
May I? This is not something I'd thought about before, but now that we're having the conversation, you know, in the annual reporting, you know, for NSF grants, when you do your annual reports, there's a series of questions that have to do with essentially capacity building at the individual level, capacity building at the organizational level in different kinds of ways. It strikes me as a funny disconnect, perhaps, that at the front end, the question is being asked essentially, how much capacity do you have? And then later in the reporting, it's how much capacity did you build? You might wonder, why not ask up front, will the proposed activity build capacity? Or is there the potential to build capacity as one possibility? It doesn't have to be either or, but currently this is essentially asking how much capacity do you have only.
Yeah. I would maybe, an interesting point, but I think again, there's the capacity to do the work as proposed, which could be capacity to further build capacity among undergraduate students, graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, et cetera. So there's, you know, can one execute the plan as proposed to realize the goals of the project? And that might include further building capacity, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Kevon, there's that section that says, do you have, list your equipment. What do you have at your institution to do this? Can you in fact carry it out? But I like the idea of asking in the step to build capacity at your MSI or your emerging. Yeah, I kind of like that. I don't know how you'd state it as a request, but describe it, or where does this take you? Where does this get you so that you are better prepared the next time, or your institution's better, or how I build team. That's the piece that's the team building part. Often we're not encouraged to go interinstitutionally, not intra, yes, but not inter. It's not as, yeah, I like the question. I don't know how you phrase it.
I mean, this gets a little more at you know, broader impacts more broadly. One of the things that PIs, at least in most of these programs, will think about in terms of building capacity. If we're talking human capacity, they're going to be talking about individuals at the undergraduate or graduate level. And this is one of the places where I think as one looks at broader impacts, one has to look holistically, because that is not sufficient. One needs to go farther down into the pipeline in order to really address the issues. And I know from the various working groups I've been involved in here, we gravitate towards the growing people who look like us, which we need, but that's not the only thing we need. And we need a lot more of people who, you know, have the same kind of beginnings of the background that we have, but then choose to go in different directions. And so I don't know that it fits exactly here, but I think we really have to discipline ourselves not to get too tracked into cloning ourselves.
Going back to where we were discussing, we might want to think about well-qualified and the potential. This is one where we might want to think about, and staff can help us focus on that, come back to sort of the potential well-qualified nature of people who are in the process. Let's go to the final element, which goes to resources. Again, somewhat similar to what we've been discussing in terms of the home organization or through collaborations to carry out the proposed activities. That one, I think, is appropriately, but it's also, I don't think it needs the potential qualifier. I think it allows people to call out collaborations and things like that, which I think is helpful.
If I might just comment on this one, but I think it applies also to the question we were just talking about previously. In both the how well qualified is the individual, et cetera, and are there adequate resources? You know, those two questions, as they are currently written, end, I think appropriately, with the qualifier to conduct the proposed activities.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the questions, you asked us to consider is about potential bias. And it seems to me that in practice, these questions almost invite reviewers to stop with the first half of the question. In other words, it's supposed to be about the proposed activities, but I think there's at least the temptation or the invitation to consider how well qualified is the individual, period. What kinds of resources do they have available to them, period.
Mm-hmm.
And that then immediately puts you in the position of rewarding individuals, organizations that just have more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting, the two questions. The previous one is how well qualified, and this one is, are there adequate resources?
That's why this one's better.
Yeah. So if you need a vacuum chamber to perform this, it doesn't matter if it's 8 feet in diameter or 16 feet in diameter, do you have it adequate for this or not? And then the previous one does give you the temptation of going,
right.
He's been PI 27 times.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So
right.
We should award
yeah.
that.
Yeah, so that difference between how well versus is it adequate. In addition to that, I think what I'm getting at is that at the risk of wordsmithing, I might almost want to reverse the order in which these questions are, the words in the questions, so that it's very clear in the context of the proposed activities, comma.
Yeah.
Good.
Is there adequate?
Yeah.
That's a very good idea.
Steve, can I add
Please,
a little bit? So in this case, we assume that emerging institutions have an access to these resources and everything. Is there any way NSF could facilitate this matchmaking of resources available in national labs and everything, so that the moment this question is asked, some of the emerging institutions may not have the resources, so they'll just drop out of the merit review? Is there any way we can provide that access right up front? It's an implementation side, but just wanted to make sure that many of the institutions will fall out in this.
Mm-hmm.
And how many more staff does it take to do that?
Since we are talking about implementation, I think whatever staff necessary, we may have to do it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that is interesting about this question of what constitutes adequate resources and resources and institutional capacity be considered for each criterion, we'll remind ourselves that one of the very important things that was done, especially during the America Competes legislation, and to some extent AICI, there was recognition that generally potential PIs don't have enough access to institutional infrastructure or know-how on the broader impacts side of things. And that is why express recommendations were set in place for institutions to assume more responsibility on that criterion. For example, as almost to the previous point, expressly inform PIs about related projects that they could collaborate or align with on their campus or elsewhere in the field to build, rather than them having to start from scratch to find relevant broader impacts. And that has, I think a case can be made that that is one of the reasons NSF funded the previous NABI and now the ARIS to sort of set in place a national resource or infrastructure that could help interested PIs strengthen their institutional capacity as well as the individual level capacity to compete more successfully on the broader impacts criterion.
Okay, moving on to slide 13. This is sort of the collective 5 elements. One thing, I find it appealing in some ways to have 5 elements which apply both to intellectual merit and to broader impacts. And yet it also causes me to question in my mind, would it be more appropriate to have elements that deal with more specifically with intellectual merit vis-a-vis broader impacts? What do you folks think about that conundrum? Yeah.
Repeat the question,
I mean,
please.
intellect, how much do these 5 elements cover equally both intellectual merit and broader impact? Should we have one set of elements for broader impact, one set of elements for intellectual merit, or do we think it's kind of cool, which I kind of think it's cool, to have something that applies to both?
Steve, on the number 5, maybe the problem would be in the broader impact. They may not have resources.
Probably both. I mean, if you have an seriously under-resourced institution, then you really have to ask that question. Or if you need access to something that is hugely oversubscribed, what are the odds of being able to get it? I actually like the integration, and some of them it seems artificial to try to parse them.
Fall apart, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But in practice, I'm trying to remember the last time I was on a review panel. I feel like the way that the reviews are usually organized, it's, intellectual merit, strengths, weaknesses, broader impact, strengths, weaknesses. I'm trying to remember whether in practice these 5 things are used.
Again, it's been a while since I was a program director, but certainly on panels that I was involved in, yes.
Good, because some one I was involved in didn't matter. It was years ago, though. So I'm curious, has somebody in between here been on a panel recently? More recently?
Dan? All right.
What's the question?
The question, Dan, I was trying to remember, well, my memory is that in constructing our reviews, the structure was intellectual merit, strengths and weaknesses, broader impact, strengths and weaknesses. It was not merit review element 1, merit review element 2. What I'm getting at is that if, right now we're talking about sort of, do we like the merit review elements? Mm-hmm. And it's making me ask, at the end of the day, whether we like them or not. The question is, to what extent do they drive the very structure of the review process?
Mm-hmm. Honest answer, not very much.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as a practice, and again, this is a couple of years ago, but You know, I have a different opinion about the pros and cons of in-person panel reviews versus separate reviews in terms of getting independent perspective. That's a different conversation. But people show up with some written comments. There's a debate, but I don't ever remember us going through the criteria and saying, you know, what do we think about these? It's exactly what you said. Here's the intellectual merit. Are we satisfied with the broader impacts? Okay, now let's argue about the proposals in the pool.
Wanda makes the point that for the staff, we should think about that as an implementation issue when we get to that sort of thing. I'm kind of disappointed that it didn't work out that way. Because so much thought has gone into these elements, and I'm kind of fond of them. How did you feel about the process now that you're aware of these elements and the criteria and whatever?
Well, I was aware of them before. I would say, though, this goes back to our earlier conversation about culture. I think there's the de facto and there's the de jure, and they're not the same thing. And so if we want change in the review process, we actually have to reshape the culture. It's probably more important than the words. I mean, the words are the supporting evidence for the culture you want to drive, but it's the culture that determines what happens. The reason I would just interject my bias, I know that panel reviews drive more timely response, but they also lead to power dynamics in the room. And I've seen more than one case where the most powerful personality in the room determined the rankings, right? And so that's a whole other cultural situation that could affect outcomes.
So if I can jump in really quick. Sorry to join late. Good to see everyone. I think I'm up to speed on what the discussion is. I wanted to kind of make a point around the fact that these criteria, and really whatever they are or will be, are open to the PIs writing the proposals as well as the reviewers reviewing them. So in my experience in helping PIs write thousands of proposals, we walk through these to make sure that in their writing, they are addressing all of these things, whether it's in the text of the program or project description, it's in the facilities, equipment, and other resources, such as number 5. It's in your bio sketch. It's all throughout the proposal. It's not necessarily just wrapped up in intellectual merit and broader impacts. And so when reviewers are instructed, receive their proposals to review, all of this information is made available. Now, to the extent that, so for example, when I was a reviewer, I went through all of these things. I looked for examples so that I could reinforce in the discussion where I saw bits and pieces aligning with all of these elements. That's not to say that everyone does that, but everyone gets this. This is the rubric that people follow or should follow to do the merit review. So by having detailed content that everyone, both on the proposal side and the review side, can agree to use is an important function of the whole review process. So, what I see in these elements are things that other agencies also use in reviews. So for PIs that apply to many different types of funding agencies, these are very common questions or very common things that people look for. So, it might be just my habit of being familiar with these elements and incorporating them into training PIs on how to write a successful proposal. But if you were to change them, then that's a very long pathway for the culture change that I think Dan was talking about. It's a long path to get the culture to change. So just putting that out there as a sense of what people are used to versus where you might want to make a radical change or a tweak. Thank you.
Steve? Thanks, Alicia. That's helpful. The question is in the room where the panel is meeting, are these same criteria as enumerated or explained equally as important? And the experience was that around that table, I mean, the PI, I recognize these obviously. They're not foreign from when I wrote proposals, but within the room, in evaluation, are they given the kind of or is it just about intellectual merit per se? And I think Kevon, that's the same question Kevon asked. What's it like in the room? Has that changed over the last 3 decades?
I can't speak to what happened prior to 15 years ago, but I can tell you now that these review elements as well are put in the context of intellectual merit and broader impacts as the critical points of the review of the proposals. So I think it's that there's a difference between the structure of the summary and whether each one of these is explicitly addressed. The program directors will typically, in leading the panel, ensure that there is discussion of each of these and that each one of these is addressed somewhere in the panel summary, either in strengths or weaknesses, depending.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was the elements. There's one more.
Could I ask a follow-up?
Please.
Of Candace's validation? Does the same thing happen on the broader impacts component? Are the same 5 questions asked about the broader impacts as the intellectual merit? And Alicia is nodding yes.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think you asked for us to have a pin placed in this question when we get to implementation. I think that's the right thing to do. Yeah.
Okay, we've talked about the criteria, we've talked about the elements or the questions. There's one more group of items to call, which are called the principles. And I'd like to get to those. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll continue on with Wanda and the principles, and we will have made a complete circuit of what the staff has been able to find as the underlying elements, principles, and criteria of the merit review process policy. See you in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. We're now coming to the principles, which are the third element of the criteria, the questions or elements, and then the principles. Wanda will lead us through that. Wanda.
Thank you very much, Steve, and moving that conversation forward. So as we're nearing the end of our meeting, we've got about half hour to go, we'd like to turn our attention to the principles by which all NSF-funded projects should adhere to, which then guides all who engaged with the merit review process from proposal to award. These are principles that the previous task force felt necessary to articulate in order to clarify the criteria further. Located in the PAPG, you can also find them in tab 110.1 of your board book. Remember, we'll continue to come back to these principles repeatedly throughout our process, so consider this an introductory discussion. With regard to the first principle, which says allow NSF projects, all NSF projects should be of the highest quality and have the potential to advance, if not transform, the frontiers of knowledge. Again, using our mission as our foundation, how does this principle achieve NSF's mission?
Could I ask first, if it's not out of order, what is the understanding of operationally the rationale or the need for articulating these principles? I mean, as a principled person, I'm all for principles, but why do we need them in the context of the merit review process? I don't mean to get into a big, long philosophical thing. I know you want to work through it. Is there a simple way to articulate it?
I might just offer that they offer context in which the criteria should be interpreted. That's not to say that they are presented for the people actually making decisions with the criteria as that context, but I think it generally informs how to understand the meaning behind the criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification also, John. Do you see any potential for bias in the application of this principle?
Yeah, I mean, the question to me is highest quality. There are certain goals you want to achieve, but you know, Kevin and I were just talking about how if you have a bunch of relatively young researchers on a review panel who are concerned about things like getting tenure, your definition of highest quality is going to be probably different than your more mature full professors who've been around the block a whole bunch of times and may well be thinking about broader impacts in a very different way than your young ones who think they know the rules of the game and what they need to do to demonstrate highest quality for themselves. And so, you know, it's just rife with potential for bias.
Thank you, Julia. Any other comments on this front? I want to return to that point after we go to some of the others. We'll move now to the second principle. A lot of language there. NSF projects in the aggregate should contribute more broadly to achieving societal goals. These broader impacts may be accomplished through the research itself, through activities that are directly related to specific research projects, or through activities that are supported by but are complementary to the project. Any thoughts?
I think the one reaction I have is in the aggregate.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it's comma delimited there right at the beginning, you know, is giving it prominence and emphasis, and that may be appropriate, what we want, but from the standpoint of informing the merit review process, how does an individual proposer, on the one hand, how does a reviewer, on the other hand, how does a review panel, on the third hand, what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it almost seems like the first sentence is more for the reviewers, and then the rest of it is towards the proposer.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So this, I think this principle, and again, these are guiding principles. These are high-level guiding principles for all of NSF's work, or for our work. So this is what helps people think about broader impacts as really being broad and not so localized or specific in terms of the project per se. So let's say, for example, with the program that we've started up in OIA, granted, national transformation is the broader impact. That is the goal. We want to see nationally transformative ideas. We don't expect any one project to transform the nation, but in aggregate, over time, that's what we want to see. So being able to emphasize in aggregate what it means collectively across NSF's portfolio of investments, should we be seeing a positive impact impact on society, to national security, to relating to NSF's mission in aggregate. Yes, I feel like that's the important way in which we should be evaluating these proposals, because it's very difficult for any singular PI or project to have benefit to society. You could see the potential for that, but any especially junior faculty, the breadth of the research idea that they want to figure out and carve out a research program that they might be able to implement over time and grow and scale and so on. Same thing with broader impacts. They should be able to start with something and then grow it and see how it benefits society in aggregate with others' efforts as well.
So Alicia, if I may, this is Kayvon. What you just said makes a lot of sense to me from the standpoint of kind of at the portfolio level or at the program level, providing guidance. But individual reviewers, right, see this too, I think. And so I'm a PI and I'm running a proposal, and I want to make sure that I'm going to do everything I can to get an excellent on my broader impacts. And if I'm looking at this guidance, what do I do with the in the aggregate part?
So here's what advice I would have given to a PI. So, and Kayvon, you and I have been on CIOS. So CIOS produces a report every 2 years that has something to say about broadening participation. So let's say that my broader impacts for my career, my research program is focused on broadening participation of groups underrepresented in STEM. And I want to make progress in that, but I'm not going to solve that problem for the nation with each and every project that I do, but I can make steps towards perhaps solving some of the localized concern around broadening participation of groups underrepresented in STEM, or that maybe in aggregate, I'm going to take advice from a CIOS report and say, in the CIOS report, they recommended to NSF to do this. I can do that at my individual level, and I can make a difference by doing that as it relates to my own research project. So it might not be that I'm thinking of it as just a little, my toe is dipped in the water and I'm trying to make a difference. I'm putting it in the context of this big national effort that CIOS, for just reference to that report, CIOS thinks is important enough to recommend to NSF that they do something about it. So I often tried to give PIs that outside bigger context that they could point to. We do that with strategic priorities for intellectual merit all the time.
And if I may build on that, the PIs, there's no secret sauce for a specific broader impact that's going to be the best. The broader impacts, like the intellectual merit, need to be matched to the PI and the institution's expertise, along with their collaborators. So the best advice you can give is to do the best job that you can with the resources, partnerships, capabilities, expertise that you have, and that is appropriate to the topic of your proposal.
Thank you, Alicia and Candace. Suresh, you had a comment?
So maybe in accountability state, do we have like an aggregate report done for each and every program periodically? This is what the program has done. This is what the program has done, so that we get a broader picture of what aggregate we have done in the programmatic level. That's my question.
Many programs do conduct periodic third-party independent evaluations, yes.
These reports are available on the openly?
There is a transparency guideline as part of the NSF evaluation policy. So certainly one is encouraged to make the information about the studies that are being conducted and results available as appropriate.
I'd like to follow on to Scott's previous comment that parts of the principle could be read more for program level consideration, while other parts without instructions could be read more for the proposer. And secondly, the last sentence in particular, and this appears in our latest PAPG, says very clearly, we were talking about this earlier, that the projects may be based on previously established and/or innovative methods and approaches, but in either case must be well justified. So that gives us some insight into the currency of whether it all has to be new and creative, or whether, in fact, it can build upon previously established evidence-based effectiveness. I was wondering, Alicia and Candace made observation that the 5 elements the program officers absolutely use when instructing reviewers. Is that also the case with regard to the current merit review principles? Are those emphasized, or do you consider that higher level consideration?
Candace, do you want to go first?
Alicia, I was hoping you would go first, but
well, I mean, in my experience, both being on the review side and then on the as an external person reviewing for NSF, this is content that is part of understanding the review criteria. And so again, it's in the PAPG. The PAPG is what guides understanding of NSF. Especially this last line, Wanda, that you point out that activities may be based on previously established or innovative methods and approaches. I'm sure in the context of broader impacts, I have heard anecdotally that sometimes people believe that their broader impacts have to be new and not evidence-based, but this guiding principle suggests that that's not the case. And again, to the extent that reviewers are acting on the information that's given to them when they are invited to be a reviewer and complete a review, then they shouldn't be making comments to say, oh, well, these broader impacts aren't new, or these broader impacts are the same broader impacts that this PI has been using for years. Both of those things are acceptable. And so again, sometimes we know that reviewers say things that aren't in line with the review criteria. The program director who makes the decision, not the reviewers, but the program director makes the decision to disregard a comment that isn't following the merit review guidelines.
Thank you, Alicia. Candace?
I would really just echo what Alicia said. I think these are made available in through our policy documents and the instructions to written instructions and guidelines that are provided to reviewers. I would say in practice, they may not be as explicitly used in guiding the discussions within a panel as the merit review elements, but these are tied to the merit review elements quite directly. So, and I think the program directors, again, play an important role in correcting if the discussions go off the rails or are not in line with these principles, what might be said by the panelists.
That's extremely important. One of the distinctions that you're making in that statement is that there is active proactivity on the part of program staff when offering instructions. When we're talking about the 5 elements, there seems to be less consistency in the proactivity of program officers also emphasizing these 3 review principles that could, in advance, provide a framework for the reviewers to realize that these 3 higher level, albeit, but these 3 higher level principles should be taken into account. So that's one observation that we just might want to give, that we might want to revisit. Interestingly, in terms of questions and feedback from the committee, we noticed the qualification of, as Kayvon mentioned earlier, in the aggregate applied here, primarily for societal impacts, broader impacts. Do you think an aggregated approach to achieving broader impact goals is appropriate compared to the allowance of disaggregated approaches to achieving intellectual merit goals? Be interested in the commission's and participants' thoughts on that.
Well, I think, Wanda, what you're asking now is really what prompted me to put my finger on that phrase in the aggregate earlier. It makes all the sense in the world to me that at a program level, there's careful thought put into the portfolio balance across disciplines, across just the different priorities for that division or that directorate or that program or what have you. That makes all the sense in the world to me. And, you know, and maybe it makes sense for the merit review principles to speak to that idea of aggregation and portfolio balance. I don't know. I think where it causes me some difficulty is to the extent that these merit review principles inform PIs how they're thinking about making sure that what they propose is going to be reviewed strongly. And if an individual PI is looking at in the aggregate, either for intellectual merit and or for broader impacts, I'm sorry, I'm running out of words here. It feels to me like you're sort of asking individual PIs to try to figure out this portfolio balance thing.
Well, that's very helpful, Kayvon. It suggests at the policy level, we may want to revisit at this stage, the commission may want to revisit what the policy language looks like, but this is also particularly important at the implementation and accountability stages. So these are some observations, comments that have been offered that we want to keep uppermost in mind. Julia?
Yeah, well, actually, when you're talking about the technical work, the research, you don't want your entire portfolio in a given directorate focused on exoplanets, to take a random example. And so it happens, it just, because of who is on the panels, that sorts itself out and say, you know, this person is just really much better qualified to do this work than that person or that group. And that sorts itself out. In broader impacts, we don't have comparable expertise on the panels, and therefore it gets a lot mushier and messier. And, you know, those of us sitting around this table, at least those of us on the science board, with a few notable exceptions, are not qualified, you know, are not really immersed in this and are kind of uncomfortable in that space.
Very helpful conversation on these principles. In the interest of time, let me move on to the third principle, and there might be similar kinds of considerations. Assessment and evaluation of NSF-funded projects should be based on the appropriate metrics, keeping in mind the likely correlation between the effect of broader impacts and the resources provided to implement projects. This ties back to one of the elements, key elements Steve was talking about earlier. If the size of the activity is limited, evaluation of that activity in isolation is not likely to be meaningful. Thus, assessing the effectiveness of these activities may best be done at a higher, more aggregated level than the individual projects. So aggregation is raised expressly for two of these three principles. Okay. Do you see any potential for bias in the application of this third principle? Or what are your thoughts in general? And then I'll turn it immediately over to Steve for closing remarks.
Wanda? My only, the question is, in those ones that are really creative, innovative, where there is no baseline, there is no context, for those blue sky projects, how does this apply? I mean, does this get weighed against those who are really out there in front and asking the really far-reaching question that's never been asked before?
I think I'll just say again that this one really feels to me like it's directed at the program level. And as an individual proposer, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that at all. Again, I think what I'm coming to realize is that if merit review principles, if it's important to have them and if it's important to articulate them, we may just need to be very explicit about principles that are really intended for programs to keep in mind versus ones that are really important for individual proposers to keep in mind.
Turn you back into the hands of Steve for closing remarks.
I'd like to thank everyone very much for participating in this. It's been a bit of a tour of the horizon with respect to what staff and we have been able to develop in terms of the policies that govern the merit review process. It's humbling to see what's been done over the past 27 years. And yet I think there are areas where we can make a contribution with respect to some potential ideas that were discussed and have been reflected by staff. And we'll get back to everyone with the results of this conversation. I would thank everyone for completing our poll to plan out regular commission meetings over the next few months. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 24th from 12 to 1. This will be a virtual meeting via Zoom. You have also received a calendar invite and reminder emails to be forthcoming. We will use this time to continue our discussion on merit review policy. We also had, Alicia, before you joined us, we asked for if we could have some type of retreat or whatever with some actual program managers and really have an understanding of the practical nuts and bolts of the merit review process. We think that would very much benefit our thoughts together as we work to understand this. Finally, as much as possible, we'd like this to be a transparent process. While we plan to administer surveys and requests for information to solicit specific feedback on specific policies, we also welcome general suggestions and questions. Please reach out to us with questions or comments via email at meritreviewcommission@nsf.gov. And to learn more about activities regarding this reexamination, please visit nsf.gov/NSB. Thank you all again for your time and for a very productive meeting today. This concludes our business for the day, and the meeting is adjourned at 11:57.